The city skyline gleamed through the glass walls of the office as the sun set, casting long shadows across the floor. The atmosphere inside the boardroom was tense. Lucas, Clara, and Raphael sat silently around the long table, their eyes fixed on the head of the table where their father, Antonio, stood. He was a man of few words, but his presence alone carried the weight of the world. Antonio, founder and CEO of a global conglomerate, had summoned his 3 children for an announcement that would change their lives. For years, they had each assumed their roles within the company, but never had they been given true authority. That was about to change. Clearing his throat, Antonio glanced at each of them in turn. His gaze lingered on Lucas, the eldest, confident and self-assured in his finely tailored suit. Then on Clara, her eyes sharp with intelligence, hands clasped on the table, ready to prove herself. Finally, Raphael, the youngest, leaned back in his chair, more relaxed but clearly intrigued. The weight of this moment wasn't lost on any of them. Antonio began to speak, his voice steady. As you know, I've built this company from the ground up. But there comes a time when every leader must step aside and test the next generation. He paused, allowing the words to sink in. I will be taking a year-long sabbatical. Lucas' eyebrows raised in surprise, but he remained silent. Clara, however, leaned forward slightly, her curiosity piqued. Raphael's expression shifted, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. I'm leaving the company in your hands, Antonio continued, his tone unyielding. For the next 12 months, the 3 of you will run it. At the end of the year, I will decide who is truly worthy of inheriting everything. The air in the room thickened. Each sibling glanced at the other, the unspoken competition already beginning to take shape. They had worked together before, but this was different. This was war, and the stakes had never been higher. I won't be telling you what criteria I'll use to make my decision, Antonio added, pacing slowly around the room. But know this, it's not just about profits. It's about character. A cold silence followed his words. Lucas sat straighter, his mind already calculating strategies. Clara's lips tightened in determination, her eyes darting between her brothers. Raphael, though less experienced, met his father's gaze with an unexpected resolve. He had always been the wild card, the one with ideas that didn't fit the mold, but now, perhaps, that was exactly what the company needed. Antonio's eyes swept over his children one final time before he turned toward the door. You have 1 year. Make it count. With that, he left the room, his footsteps echoing in the now silent space. For a moment, no one spoke. The enormity of the situation hung heavily between them, like an invisible wall. Then, almost as if they had rehearsed it, the 3 siblings stood, their movements sharp and decisive. Lucas was the first to speak, his voice cool and composed. Well, we all know how this is going to end, he said, flashing a knowing smirk. May the best man win. Clara shot him a glance, her tone cutting through the air like a knife. Or woman, she corrected. Raphael, standing at the back of the room, chuckled under his breath. Don't be so sure, Lucas, he said, his usual carefree attitude now tinged with something more serious. This isn't going to be as easy as you think. Without another word, the 3 siblings filed out of the boardroom, each lost in their own thoughts. The future of the company, and their father's legacy, was now in their hands. But little did they know, the real challenge had yet to reveal itself. As they stepped into the corridors of power, the question was no longer if they could handle the company. It was whether they could handle each other. The following morning, the shift in the atmosphere was palpable. The sleek glass doors of the company's headquarters slid open for Lucas, Clara, and Raphael, each arriving with a newfound sense of purpose. There was no more safety net, no more looking over their shoulders for their father's approval. Now they would have to prove themselves not just to Antonio, but to each other. Lucas was the first to act. He stormed into the executive office that had once been their father's, his stride confident, every step echoing his ambition. The office was immaculate, a symbol of decades of dominance in the business world. Lucas settled into the high-backed chair, his fingers tracing the polished mahogany desk. Felt right, like it was meant for him. Without hesitation, he started making calls. Lucas had always been about results, numbers, profits. He implemented aggressive cost-cutting measures within hours. Departments that had grown comfortable with excess budgets suddenly found themselves facing drastic cuts. His voice was calm, but the impact was immediate. "Efficiency," he muttered, tapping a pen against the desk. "That's what'll win this." Meanwhile, on the other side of the building, Clara was in a room filled with brainstorming teams, charts, and projections. Her mind raced with ideas. Innovation had always been her strength, the future her playground. She believed in moving forward, in evolving the company beyond its current boundaries. Her team gathered around her as she spoke with passion, outlining projects that would take the company into new markets, technology, renewable energy, partnerships with cutting-edge startups. Her vision was bold, and those who worked under her couldn't help but be inspired. "We need to look beyond today," she declared, her voice unwavering. "We have to build something that lasts." There was fire in her eyes, a determination to succeed on her own terms. And then there was Raphael. He wasn't in an office or a boardroom. He was walking through one of the company's factories, shaking hands with workers, asking them how they felt about the recent changes, listening to their concerns. Raphael believed in people, in the power of sustainable, ethical business practices. He had always seen things differently, a trait that often put him at odds with Lucas. Standing amid the hum of machines, he spoke to the plant manager about implementing environmentally friendly practices. "It's not just about what we make," Raphael said, his voice calm but firm. "It's about how we make it." The manager raised an eyebrow. "But these changes could slow down production," he cautioned. "I'm not asking for shortcuts," Raphael replied, folding his arms. "I'm asking for a new way forward, one that'll keep us ahead in the long run." As the day wore on, the tension between the siblings simmered beneath the surface. Lucas saw Raphael's ideas as idealistic and impractical. In his mind, profits came first and everything else was secondary. Clara, while not dismissive of Raphael's approach, was focused on her innovations, thinking of the company's expansion. For her, the challenge wasn't whether they could keep up with the competition, it was whether they could leap ahead. The unspoken rivalry between them grew. Lucas believed the numbers would speak for themselves. Clara aimed for visionary achievements, and Raphael, though underestimated by many, hoped his long-term strategies would pay off. By the end of the first week, each sibling had charted their own course. They barely spoke to one another, except in meetings where formality demanded it. The competition was now fully underway, and though no words were exchanged, the lines had been drawn. Yet, through it all, one thought lingered in each of their minds. What was the hidden condition their father had mentioned? What would truly decide who inherited the company? The question, unanswered and unsettling, began to weigh on them all. As the company moved forward under 3 different visions, the siblings couldn't help but wonder if they were missing something critical. Something that would determine not just the fate of the company, but their family's legacy. What had started as silent competition between the siblings soon morphed into something far more volatile. Weeks into the challenge, the air in the office was charged with unspoken resentment and simmering frustrations. Each of the siblings, in their own way, had dug in, firmly believing their path was the right one. Lucas, ever the pragmatist, was relentless in his pursuit of short-term profits. He had slashed operational costs across departments, ruthlessly cutting redundancies and pushing for faster, more efficient turnarounds. The balance sheets reflected his aggressive tactics, with the company's profits rising sharply in the short run. For Lucas, the numbers were all the proof he needed that his strategy was superior. But the office atmosphere told a different story. Employees, some who had been with the company for decades, whispered in hushed voices about the wave of layoffs and the tightening restrictions. The heart of the company, its people, began to feel the weight of Lucas' leadership, and not in a way that inspired loyalty. He didn't care. Results speak louder than feelings, he thought, tapping his fingers rhythmically against his desk, confident in the approach that was yielding immediate success. Meanwhile, Clara sat in her corner office, overlooking the city, but her focus was on the horizon. Her bold initiatives were gaining traction, but at a cost. Her innovative projects, though promising, required substantial investment. Research and development, partnerships with tech startups, they were all long-term plays. Clara was betting on the future, and for her, it was the only way forward. But with Lucas tightening budgets and Raphael pushing for sustainability measures, she was caught between two worlds. One afternoon, after a particularly heated meeting, Clara stormed into Raphael's office. "We're getting strangled by Lucas," she snapped, throwing a pile of reports on his desk. "Every new project I push through gets shot down because he's obsessed with short-term numbers. This company needs to evolve, and he's stuck in the past." Raphael glanced up from his work, his usual calm demeanor undisturbed. "He's doing what he thinks is best," he replied, his voice measured, though there was an edge to his words. "But that doesn't mean we can't push back." Clara crossed her arms, her frustration evident. "And what about you? All this talk about sustainability and ethics, do you really think we have the time for that? Lucas will destroy us before we even get there." Raphael's eyes hardened. "This isn't just about today. It's about the company's reputation, its future. I'm not going to compromise on that." Their conversation, while brief, echoed the growing divide between them. The family dynamic was fraying at the edges, and with each sibling pursuing their own vision, collaboration seemed more distant than ever. The following days were tense. Meetings between the three of them became battlegrounds. Lucas would present his financial reports with thinly veiled arrogance, pointing out the immediate profits his strategies had delivered. Clara would counter with projections for the future, warning that the company couldn't survive on short-term gains alone. Raphael, though often quieter, made impassioned arguments for a more sustainable and ethical approach, reminding them that the world was changing and the company needed to change with it. But it was clear they weren't just fighting over the company. They were fighting for their father's approval, for the legacy that had been promised but not yet fully revealed. The tension grew unbearable. One evening, after another contentious meeting, Lucas confronted Clara in the hallway, his voice low but filled with venom. "You're wasting time with all these ideas," he spat. "In the end, profits are what matter. You keep chasing dreams, and you'll lose everything." Clara squared her shoulders, refusing to back down. "Maybe I'm thinking beyond just this year, Lucas. Maybe I care about what happens after." Raphael, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the fray, his tone calm but firm. "We're supposed to be working together. This isn't a race to the top. It's a test, and you're failing." Lucas glared at him, fists clenched. "You think you're better because you're playing the nice guy? This company needs a leader, not someone who listens to workers' sob stories." Without another word, Lucas stormed off, leaving Clara and Raphael standing in the hallway, the silence between them heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. As the weeks passed, it became clear that their father's test was no longer just about the company. It was about survival. The siblings had been set on a path not only to prove themselves as business leaders, but to reveal their true natures. And the cracks were only widening. The first cracks were subtle, almost unnoticeable at first, like hairline fractures in the foundation of an old, proud building. But soon, those cracks began to widen, and the obstacles that lay ahead made themselves known with stark clarity. Lucas, riding high on the early successes of his cost-cutting measures, was beginning to feel the pressure. Departments were running on skeleton crews, stretched thin under his ruthless efficiency model. He could see it in the faces of his employees, a weariness, a quiet desperation. It didn't matter to Lucas at first. He told himself this was the price of progress, that discomfort was natural in the face of change. He'd convinced himself that, as long as the numbers kept climbing, everything else was background noise. But then the numbers stalled. It happened almost overnight. Contracts that had been seemingly locked in were suddenly in jeopardy. Clients, once satisfied, started voicing concerns about the quality of service. The constant push for speed and savings had left gaps that Lucas had failed to account for. Angry emails flooded his inbox. His carefully calculated projections were now riddled with unexpected red marks, threatening his reputation within the company. He slammed his fists on his desk one evening, the frustration boiling over. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered under his breath, staring at the spreadsheets as if willing them to change. Everything was perfect. Across the building, Clara faced her own hurdles. Her innovation-driven strategies were bleeding resources. The projects she'd spearheaded were ambitious, but they were slow to bear fruit, too slow for a company used to immediate returns. Investors were growing restless, board members raised questions about her judgment, and the tech partnerships she'd been cultivating were becoming costly ventures with uncertain outcomes. Sitting in a late-night meeting with her team, Clara could feel the weight of their gazes on her. They were looking for answers, for direction, but she was starting to doubt herself. Every bold move seemed to have hidden pitfalls, every risk an unseen consequence. Her vision was forward-thinking, yes, but was it realistic? In a moment of rare vulnerability, she glanced around the table and asked quietly, "Are we pushing too far, too fast?" Her question hung in the air, unanswered. She wasn't the only one questioning things. Meanwhile, Raphael was facing obstacles of his own, though of a different kind. His push for sustainability and ethical practices was met with resistance from the factory floors. Employees were torn. On one hand, they appreciated his efforts to involve them in decisions, to listen to their concerns. On the other hand, the changes he was proposing were slowing down production, making some wonder if his ideals were at odds with the company's survival. During a tour of one of the factories, Raphael was pulled aside by the plant manager, a grizzled man who'd been with the company since his father's early days. "I like what you're trying to do," the manager said, his voice low, "but you're putting us at a disadvantage. The world out there doesn't care about green initiatives if we can't deliver on time." Raphael frowned. He had known this would be difficult, but he hadn't anticipated this level of pushback. He was trying to change the culture of a company built on decades of traditional practices. It was like trying to steer a massive ship in a new direction. Slow, cumbersome, and fraught with resistance. Yet Raphael remained resolute. "I get it," he said, looking the manager square in the eye. "But if we don't change now, the world will leave us behind. Short-term gains won't matter when the market shifts." Still, the doubt lingered, creeping into his thoughts during late-night walks through the quiet offices. Was he being too idealistic? Was Lucas right about focusing on immediate returns? Or was Clara's forward-thinking innovation the answer? He couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what he did, it wouldn't be enough. Not for the company, and certainly not for his father's hidden expectations. Days turned into weeks, and the obstacles only grew more complex. The company's once unified vision had splintered into 3 distinct paths, each with its own hurdles. Lucas struggled to maintain control over a workforce that was starting to buckle under the pressure. Clara grappled with the cost of innovation, wondering if her dreams were too far ahead of reality. Raphael, the idealist, wrestled with balancing ethics and profitability, unsure if he was leading the company toward a better future or into a slow collapse. What none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly foresee, was that these obstacles were not just challenges to overcome. They were part of something much bigger, a test far more profound than any of them had imagined. The obstacles weren't just external, they were internal, and they were only just beginning. The pressure in the company had reached a boiling point. Each sibling was now fully immersed in their own battles, and the obstacles they'd encountered had forced their strategies to face real-world scrutiny. The stakes were higher than ever, and there was no turning back. Lucas, ever the numbers-driven tactician, decided to double down. His solution to the growing cracks in his cost-cutting approach was simple: more cuts. He tightened his grip on operations, pushing employees harder, expecting even more efficiency. He reduced budgets, slashed benefits, and outsourced whatever he could. "We have to trim the fat to survive," he kept telling himself. The bottom line was his guiding light, and if anyone dared to question his decisions, they were swiftly silenced with cold, hard data. But the numbers Lucas relied on had started to betray him. Clients were jumping ship. His obsession with profits over people was backfiring, and he could feel the unease spreading through the office. The once efficient, orderly machine he had created was beginning to falter. One morning, after receiving notice that another major client had decided to end their contract, he locked himself in his office, the silence deafening. His strategy had been airtight, he thought. So why was everything unraveling? Across the hallway, Clara was confronting her own failures. Her visionary projects, once full of promise, were moving too slowly for the investors' liking. The innovations she had promised the board were taking too long to materialize, and the bleeding of resources was becoming harder to justify. She had spent weeks trying to explain that progress required patience, that innovation couldn't be rushed. But with Lucas tightening the financial screws and the board growing more impatient by the day, Clara found herself in the crosshairs. One afternoon, she sat in her office, staring at the blueprints for a project she had fought tooth and nail to get approved. The future she had envisioned for the company was just within reach, but it felt like the present was slipping away faster than she could grasp it. The pressure to deliver results now was crushing her. She took a deep breath and made a decision. She would compromise. If she could show some progress, something tangible, she could buy herself more time. But what would it cost her? Meanwhile, Raphael's strategy, one rooted in ethics and sustainability, was proving to be the hardest to maintain. His efforts to implement greener practices and create a more socially responsible company were noble, but they were dragging down efficiency. Employees were growing frustrated with the slower pace, and his father's old partners, men who had been in business for decades, were not impressed with his idealism. During a tense meeting with the board, Raphael found himself on the defensive, his ideals being challenged by seasoned executives who saw no value in his vision of a greener future. "We don't need to save the world," one board member sneered. "We need to save the company." Raphael clenched his jaw, the weight of their words sinking in. For the first time, he questioned himself. Maybe he had pushed too hard. Maybe his approach wasn't realistic. But deep down, he knew he couldn't compromise his values. He wouldn't. Still, the weight of doubt hung heavy over him as he walked out of the boardroom that day, feeling the sting of their criticism long after the meeting had ended. Each sibling's strategy, once seemingly foolproof in their own minds, was being put to the ultimate test. Lucas' ruthless efficiency was starting to eat away at the soul of the company. Clara's innovation was proving too costly and slow to deliver, and Raphael's ethics were at odds with the reality of running a profitable business. In the weeks that followed, the tension between them grew more pronounced. Meetings devolved into arguments, with Lucas pointing out the mounting costs of Clara's projects and dismissing Raphael's ethical concerns as unprofitable distractions. Clara fought back, defending her vision, but even she was starting to waver. Raphael, though steadfast in his beliefs, found himself increasingly isolated, unable to find common ground with his siblings. The office atmosphere had become toxic, a battlefield where every decision felt like life or death. Each sibling clung desperately to their strategy, unwilling to admit defeat, unwilling to show weakness. But as the company's performance continued to slip, it became clear that something had to give. And then, in the midst of their internal warfare, something unexpected happened. One morning, the siblings were summoned to their father's office for an unscheduled meeting. The atmosphere was tense as they entered the room, each of them on edge, wondering what this could mean. Their father, who had been conspicuously absent for much of the past few months, sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. He looked at each of them in turn, his eyes lingering just a moment longer on Lucas, then Clara, and finally Raphael. The silence was suffocating. Then, in a quiet voice, he spoke words that would shake them to their core. The tension in the room was almost tangible as the siblings gathered in their father's office. His statement echoed through the silence, each word heavy with implication. The real test hasn't even begun. The air seemed to thicken, charged with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Their father leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning their faces with an inscrutable expression. "I've watched you all," he began, his voice steady, "and I see you've made choices, taken risks, and faced obstacles. But there are things you don't know, things that will shape your future more than anything you've done so far. Lucas, unable to contain his frustration, spoke up. What are you talking about? We've done everything you asked. We've shown what we can do. His father's gaze didn't waver. You've each been tested in different ways, but there are secrets I've kept, and now you must uncover them. A murmur of confusion passed between the siblings. Clara's brow furrowed. Secrets? What kind of secrets? Without answering directly, their father stood and walked to a large, ornate cabinet in the corner of the room. He opened it to reveal a collection of old files and documents, their edges yellowed with age. He pulled out a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn, and placed it on the desk before them. This journal, he said, holds the key to understanding the real challenge. It contains details about the company's past, decisions that were made before any of you were born, and a revelation that will change everything. Raphael moved closer, drawn by a curiosity he couldn't ignore. He reached out to touch the journal, but their father's hand stopped him. Before you open it, you must understand that what you'll find inside will force you to confront the very foundation of your beliefs and strategies. The siblings exchanged glances, their faces a mix of eagerness and trepidation. Clara took a deep breath. What's in there? Their father's eyes softened. It's a story of sacrifice, of choices made long before you were born. And it's a story that will reveal the true nature of this challenge. With a nod, Clara carefully opened the journal. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, old photographs, and documents detailing the early days of the company. As they read, the history of the company unfolded before them. Stories of its founders, their struggles, and their ideals. One particular entry caught their attention. It detailed a pivotal decision made by their grandfather, a decision that had set the course for the company's future. The document revealed that the company's success had come at a high personal cost. The founders had sacrificed their own dreams and values to build something greater, something that had ultimately defined their legacy. As they read further, another document revealed a hidden clause in the company's founding charter. It stipulated that the family's wealth and control over the company would be transferred only if the heirs proved themselves capable of understanding and upholding the principles upon which the company was built. The realization hit them like a wave. Their father's test wasn't just about business acumen or leadership. It was about understanding the deeper values and sacrifices that had shaped the company. It was about proving they could honor the legacy and not just wield the power. Lucas slammed the journal shut, his face pale. You mean to say we've been competing for something we didn't fully understand? That all our efforts might be meaningless if we don't get this right? Their father nodded. Yes, and now you must decide how to move forward. Your strategies, your goals, they must align with the true essence of this company's legacy. Clara, her eyes wide with realization, turned to Raphael. We've been so focused on our own approaches, we forgot to look at what really matters. Raphael nodded slowly, his expression one of deep contemplation. We've been so caught up in proving ourselves, we didn't see the bigger picture. Their father's voice softened. The challenge now is to reconcile your personal strategies with the principles that built this company. You must not only lead but also understand and honor what came before. With that, their father left the room, leaving the siblings alone with their thoughts. The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air. They had been given a chance to redefine their approach, but it came with the burden of understanding the true legacy they were meant to uphold. As they sat in silence, each sibling grappled with the new information. Their individual paths had led them to this moment, but now, they had to find a way to unite their strategies with the profound history that had shaped their family's legacy. The real test was no longer just about business success. It was about honoring the sacrifices made and integrating those lessons into their leadership. The office felt quieter than ever, the echoes of their father's words reverberating through their minds. They had uncovered the first layer of truth, but the real challenge lay ahead, reconciling their personal ambitions with the deeper principles that had guided their family for generations. The newfound revelation was like a spark in dry tinder, igniting a blaze of conflict that spread quickly through the company. The siblings' once cohesive plans began to fracture as they grappled with the deeper implications of their father's revelation. Their strategies, already under intense scrutiny, were now under a microscope of family expectations and long-hidden truths. Lucas, feeling the sting of failure more acutely than ever, saw an opportunity in the chaos. He began to manipulate the situation, subtly shifting blame for the company's issues onto his siblings. He leaned into his role as the numbers man, presenting skewed data that highlighted the flaws in Clara's and Raphael's approaches. His manipulations were subtle, but they were effective. The board, already skeptical, began to doubt Clara's innovations and Raphael's ethical practices even more. During a board meeting, Lucas presented a chart showing declining performance metrics correlated with Clara's recent projects. "We've invested so much in these new ventures, but the returns are negligible," he said, his tone grave. "Perhaps we need to reconsider our priorities." Clara, her face flushed with frustration, shot back. "The delays are due to unforeseen challenges, not a lack of potential. We need to stay the course." Raphael, watching from the sidelines, saw the seeds of discord Lucas was planting. He knew he had to act. His approach had always been to unite, to show that his ethical practices were not just idealistic but essential for the company's long-term survival. He sought out Clara to discuss a way to confront Lucas's tactics without further dividing their fractured team. In a late-night strategy session, Clara and Raphael reviewed the data Lucas had presented. They were troubled by the selective use of information. "He's twisting the facts to make us look bad," Clara said, frustration evident in her voice. "We need to expose this." Raphael nodded. "We must address these issues head-on, but we can't do it alone. We need to bring transparency and show the board that our approaches are not at odds, but complementary." Meanwhile, Lucas continued to sow discord. He began to privately meet with influential board members, subtly suggesting that the company's leadership needed a more unified, singular vision. His words were carefully chosen to stoke the flames of division, painting himself as the only one who could bring stability. One evening, as Lucas was leaving the office, he was approached by one of the senior board members. The conversation was guarded, but Lucas could sense the alignment. The board member asked probing questions about Clara's and Raphael's strategies, leading Lucas to believe that he was making progress in swaying opinions. But Raphael, aware of Lucas's maneuvers, decided it was time to confront the situation publicly. He arranged a company-wide meeting, inviting all employees and board members. Standing at the podium, he addressed the crowd with a mix of determination and vulnerability. "We're at a crossroads," Raphael began, his voice steady but passionate. "We've all been working hard, but our progress has been undermined by misinformation and division. It's time we come together and address the real issues, not just the ones that are being manipulated for personal gain." His words resonated with many in the room. Clara stood beside him, nodding in agreement. The meeting became a turning point, as Raphael and Clara laid out a transparent plan for moving forward. They presented their strategies openly, highlighting how their approaches could be integrated rather than seeing each other as threats. Lucas watched from the back of the room, his face a mask of frustration. His carefully constructed narrative was unraveling, and he could see that his tactics were beginning to backfire. As Raphael and Clara spoke, Lucas's influence waned, and the room began to buzz with renewed energy and hope. Despite their efforts to unify, the conflict was far from over. Lucas wasn't one to retreat quietly. Behind the scenes, he continued to maneuver, seeking to regain control and undermine his siblings' newfound solidarity. He began to gather allies among the more conservative board members, ensuring that the divisions he had created would not easily disappear. The internal strife had reached a boiling point, with each sibling playing a dangerous game of strategy and manipulation. As the board prepared for another critical decision, the atmosphere within the company was fraught with tension. Loyalties were tested, alliances formed and broken, and the battle for control continued. The sibling struggle had moved beyond personal ambition into a complex web of manipulation and conflict. Their once clear paths were now shrouded in uncertainty, with each decision carrying the weight of their father's legacy and the future of the company. As they faced the challenges ahead, they had to navigate not only the external pressures, but also the internal strife that threatened to tear them apart. The road ahead was fraught with danger, and the outcome remained as uncertain as ever. The atmosphere in the company office was charged with anticipation. News of the upcoming board meeting had spread like wildfire, and everyone could sense that a critical decision was imminent. The siblings were on edge, their carefully constructed plans now under intense scrutiny, and the stakes had never been higher. As the boardroom filled with board members, employees, and key stakeholders, a sense of palpable tension hung in the air. Lucas, Clara, and Raphael each took their seats at the long conference table, their expressions guarded but resolute. The meeting was expected to be a battleground, and the siblings knew that their individual and collective futures were on the line. The board chairman, a stern-faced man with years of experience, called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. Today's discussion is critical for the future of our company." Lucas took a deep breath, preparing for the confrontation that lay ahead. He had been working behind the scenes to solidify his position, but the mounting pressure was beginning to weigh on him. Clara, her face pale but determined, sat beside Raphael, who looked calm but focused. They were ready to address the board's concerns and defend their strategies. The chairman began with a summary of the current state of affairs, highlighting the various challenges and controversies that had arisen. He then turned to the siblings. "We've heard a lot about the different strategies you've each implemented. Now it's time for you to make your case. Why should your approach be considered the best path forward?" Lucas was the first to speak. He presented his case with a practiced precision, highlighting the cost savings and efficiencies his strategy had achieved. "Our primary goal is profitability. The cuts I've implemented have streamlined operations and reduced overheads. The company's survival depends on our ability to control costs and increase margins. We need to stay focused on our financial health." His presentation was met with nods from some board members, but also with visible concern from others. Clara and Raphael exchanged a glance, knowing they had their work cut out for them. Clara stood next, her voice steady despite the anxiety she felt. "While cost control is important, we must not lose sight of innovation. My projects represent the future of the company, and while they require time and investment, they offer long-term growth and competitive advantage. We need to balance short-term gains with long-term vision." The board listened intently, but some remained skeptical. The chairman's eyes turned to Raphael, who took a deep breath before speaking. "My approach focuses on integrating ethical practices and sustainability into our core operations," Raphael began. "This is not just about current profits, but about building a legacy that aligns with the values our company was founded on. We must adapt to modern expectations and create a business model that is both profitable and responsible." As Raphael spoke, murmurs of agreement and disagreement filled the room. The siblings' differing visions were laid bare, each backed by passionate arguments and compelling evidence. The board chairman leaned forward. "We appreciate your insights. However, we need to understand how you plan to resolve the ongoing conflicts and the recent performance issues. How can you ensure that your strategies will lead us to a unified, successful path?" The siblings knew that this was the crux of the matter. Each of them had to address not only their personal strategies, but also the broader question of how to harmonize their approaches and resolve the internal strife that had plagued the company. Lucas took the floor again, his tone more conciliatory. "Perhaps it's time we consider a hybrid approach. We could integrate some of Clara's innovative projects with my cost control measures, while also incorporating Raphael's sustainability practices where they make sense. This way, we align our strategies with both current needs and future goals." Clara and Raphael looked at him with surprise. It was a significant shift from his previous stance, but it also seemed like a genuine attempt to find common ground. Clara responded, "I agree that a hybrid approach could be viable, but we need clear guidelines and a timeline to ensure that all elements are balanced effectively. We can't afford to delay any longer." Raphael nodded. "And we must ensure that our ethical commitments are not compromised." We need to find a way to integrate our values without sacrificing our operational effectiveness. The siblings' discussion had turned into a collaborative effort, with each of them making concessions and seeking common ground. The board observed the evolving dynamics with a mix of interest and skepticism. As the meeting drew to a close, the chairman addressed the room. It seems that there is a potential path forward that incorporates elements from all three approaches. However, we need to see a detailed plan and a commitment to this hybrid strategy. We will reconvene in 1 week to review the progress and make a final decision. The siblings left the boardroom, the tension of the day still hanging heavy. They had navigated the confrontation but knew that their work was far from over. The path ahead was uncertain, and the challenge of unifying their strategies while addressing the company's issues loomed large. In the quiet of the office afterward, as the siblings gathered in their private space, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They had faced the board, exposed their vulnerabilities, and taken the first steps toward reconciliation. But the true test lay in translating their newfound unity into actionable results. With the board's decision looming, the siblings knew that their next steps would be crucial. They had to forge a path that balanced their individual strengths with the company's legacy, all while navigating the complex web of family dynamics and corporate expectations. As they prepared to tackle the challenges ahead, the weight of their father's legacy and their own ambitions pressed heavily upon them. The confrontation had been a turning point, but it was only the beginning of a much larger struggle. The office was eerily quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by a tense anticipation. The boardroom had been prepared for the final meeting, a make-or-break moment that would determine the future of the company and the fate of the siblings. The clock ticked ominously as the key players assembled, each bringing their own expectations and apprehensions. Lucas, Clara, and Raphael arrived early, their faces a mixture of resolve and anxiety. Each sibling had spent the past week refining their proposals, addressing the board's concerns, and trying to find a workable compromise. Today, everything would come to a head. The boardroom door opened, and the members began to filter in, exchanging whispers and nods. The chairman, looking more solemn than usual, took his place at the head of the table. The siblings took their seats, the weight of the moment evident in their expressions. The chairman cleared his throat. "Thank you all for your patience. We've reviewed the proposed hybrid strategy and have had discussions regarding its feasibility. Today, we will hear the final presentations from Lucas, Clara, and Raphael, and then we will make our decision." Lucas stood first, his demeanor controlled but his eyes betraying a hint of nerves. He presented his refined strategy with a focus on the practical aspects of the hybrid approach. "We've worked to integrate cost control measures with innovative projects, ensuring that we address both immediate financial concerns and long-term growth opportunities. Our revised plan includes specific milestones and performance metrics to track progress." He concluded with a nod, stepping back to let Clara take her turn. Clara's presentation followed, showcasing the detailed integration of her innovative projects into the hybrid model. "We've ensured that the new projects will drive growth while aligning with cost controls. The plan includes a phased rollout with clear goals and checkpoints to monitor effectiveness." Her voice was steady, but the tension in the room was palpable. Clara's presentation was thorough, addressing the board's concerns about implementation and potential risks. She finished with a hopeful note, her eyes briefly meeting Raphael's. Raphael took the stage last, presenting the ethical and sustainability aspects of the hybrid strategy. "We've balanced financial objectives with our commitment to ethical practices and long-term sustainability. Our revised approach ensures that we remain true to our core values while adapting to the evolving market demands." His words resonated with a sense of integrity and purpose. Raphael highlighted how the hybrid plan would not only address immediate challenges, but also position the company for future success. As Raphael concluded, the board members exchanged glances and murmured among themselves. The chairman called for a brief recess to allow the board to deliberate on the proposals. The siblings retreated to a side room, their faces a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. The wait was agonizing, each sibling grappling with the weight of the decision and the uncertainty of the outcome. They had worked together to create a viable plan, but the final judgment was out of their hands. After what felt like an eternity, the board reconvened. The chairman addressed the room with a solemn expression. We've reviewed the proposals and considered the feedback from all parties. The hybrid strategy proposed addresses the immediate financial concerns, incorporates innovative growth opportunities, and upholds our ethical commitments. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. Therefore, we approve the hybrid strategy as the way forward. We will implement it in phases, with regular reviews to ensure it meets our objectives and adapts to any emerging challenges. A collective sigh of relief swept over the siblings. Lucas, Clara, and Raphael exchanged glances, a mix of relief and apprehension evident in their eyes. The board's decision had validated their hard work and compromise, but the real test lay in executing the plan effectively. The chairman concluded, "Congratulations to all of you. Your dedication and collaboration have been instrumental in reaching this decision. Let's move forward with a renewed sense of purpose and unity." As the meeting adjourned, the siblings gathered outside the boardroom, the weight of the decision settling in. They had faced intense scrutiny and conflict, but their efforts had culminated in a resolution that aligned with their father's legacy and their own ambitions. In the quiet moments that followed, the siblings reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The final decision was not just a professional victory, but a personal one as well. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where they would have to navigate the complexities of their hybrid strategy and ensure its successful implementation. As they left the boardroom together, a newfound sense of unity and determination guided their steps. The future was still uncertain, but they were prepared to face the challenges ahead, knowing that their combined efforts had forged a path forward. The office buzzed with a new kind of energy. After weeks of tension and uncertainty, the implementation of the hybrid strategy had begun. The once somber atmosphere was now filled with a sense of cautious optimism. Employees moved with purpose, their steps echoing the renewed sense of direction that had emerged from the recent board decision. Lucas, Clara, and Raphael stood together in the heart of the office, observing the changes unfolding around them. The new initiatives were being rolled out, and the first signs of progress were beginning to take shape. The siblings had worked tirelessly to bring their vision to reality, and now it was time to see how their collective efforts would pan out. Lucas was in a meeting with the financial team, discussing the final adjustments to the cost control measures. His focus was unwavering as he reviewed spreadsheets and projections, ensuring that every detail aligned with the board's requirements. Despite the pressure, there was a sense of satisfaction in his meticulous work. He was determined to prove that the financial stability of the company was achievable. Clara was in the innovation lab, overseeing the early stages of her new projects. The room was alive with activity as teams of engineers and designers brought her ideas to life. Clara's excitement was palpable as she walked through the lab, offering guidance and encouragement. Her vision was now becoming tangible, and the first prototypes were a testament to her dedication. Meanwhile, Raphael was meeting with the Sustainability Committee, finalizing the integration of ethical practices into the company's operations. His focus was on ensuring that the new strategies were not only effective but also aligned with the company's values. Raphael's passion for creating a responsible business model was evident as he discussed plans and reviewed progress reports. As the day progressed, the siblings came together for a brief meeting to discuss their observations and next steps. The weight of the recent decisions still lingered, but the promise of new beginnings provided a sense of hope and determination. Lucas spoke first, his tone reflective. "We've come a long way since the board's decision. The initial feedback is promising, but we need to stay vigilant. The real challenge will be maintaining this momentum and ensuring that our strategies are executed effectively." Clara nodded in agreement. "The early results are encouraging. We've made significant strides with the new projects, but we need to continue pushing forward. It's crucial that we stay focused and address any issues as they arise." Raphael, ever the optimist, added, "The sustainability initiatives are gaining traction. It's clear that our commitment to ethical practices is resonating with both employees and customers. We need to keep this momentum going and ensure that we don't compromise on our values. As they discussed their progress, the office continued to hum with activity. The sense of unity among the siblings was evident, and their collaborative efforts were starting to bear fruit. The challenges of the past were being replaced with a renewed sense of purpose and direction. The sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the office. The siblings stood by the large windows, watching as the city lights flickered to life. The view was a reminder of the journey they had undertaken and the new chapter that lay ahead. Lucas turned to Clara and Raphael, his expression one of quiet determination. "We've achieved a lot, but this is just the beginning. We need to remain focused on our goals and continue working together to ensure the success of our strategy." Clara and Raphael exchanged nods, their faces reflecting a shared resolve. "Agreed," Clara said. "We've laid the foundation for a brighter future. Now, it's up to us to build on it and make sure that our vision becomes a reality." Raphael smiled, his eyes filled with hope. "Here's to new beginnings and the journey ahead. We faced challenges and emerged stronger. Let's continue to push forward and make the most of this opportunity." As the siblings prepared to leave the office, the atmosphere was one of optimism and determination. The road ahead would undoubtedly be filled with challenges, but they were ready to face them together. The future was uncertain, but the promise of new beginnings provided a sense of hope and possibility. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a symbol of the opportunities that awaited. The siblings stepped into the evening, ready to embrace the new chapter of their journey and build a legacy that would endure. Click on the video being recommended to you now.